Welcome to the Grant Writing Simplified podcast. This is the place to learn how to make a big impact in your community through grant writing and nonprofit consulting. The world needs you to step forward as a grant writer and use your skills to lead with confidence. I'm Teresa Huff, former special ed teacher turned grant writer and nonprofit strategist. In my 20 years of freelancing, I've helped nonprofits triple their funding and exponentially increase their reach. Now I'm stepping up to mentor freelancers and nonprofit leaders like you who are ready to take your skills to the next level. It's time to get intentional about your vision so you can create lasting change in your community. Learn the skills and strategies you need to become the grant writer the world needs. Let's do this. Hey friends, welcome back to episode 64 of Grant Writing Simplified. We have been talking lately about systems and data collection, which sounds kind of boring, but I promise you it's not. We like to make things fun and simple around here. So we're breaking it down step by step into different factors you can do. Now, last month, we talked quite a bit about storytelling with your nonprofit, and today we're going to combine the two of how you can tell stories with really good data. And I'm going to share 6 tips for using the data well, so stay tuned. Now, you might be wondering what's so great about Instrumental anyway. You know how some people use those apps that are always searching for coupons in the background for them as they're shopping, and then when they're ready to check out, boom, the app just has it right there ready to go. Instrumental is kind of like that, but for grants. It's the seamless grant search and monitoring tool that is working for you 24/7 to look for the best fit grants, and it saves hours of time and research. I really want you to see what it's all about, so I've partnered with Instrumental to give you a free 2-week trial and $50 off your first month. Go to teresahuff.com/instrumental, that's instrument with an L, and use the code GWSPOD. It'll be time well spent. All right, now let's get into today's tips. We're talking about how you can use data to tell stories. So we're kind of connecting the dots between these last few weeks and several episodes that we've talked about lately. We started the storytelling in about episode 58. So listen to all those back episodes through today, and that will help you kind of understand this whole picture. It's important when you're telling stories to tug at the heartstrings and really convey the change and the transformation it's making. But you also need to be able to back those stories with data. And sometimes we have to get a little bit creative in how to do that because it's not always spelled out for us. And if you're working on a grant application, they don't usually tell you exactly what data to use. They just ask this big question, like, how do you know this is a real need in your community and not just perceived? Or how do you know that this population is going to need this type of service that you're proposing? You have to be able to dig deep, find the data, and then make the connections for them. You have to spell it out. And usually you're on a pretty tight word count or character count or page limit to be able to do that. So today I'm going to share 6 tips for data-driven storytelling. This will help you tell better stories and pull the data so that you know exactly what to look for and how to pull that out and use that in your story well. Number 1, remember the elements of a good story. Back in school, they probably told you make sure that you're using these elements of character and plot and storyline and all the things. So make sure you have a purpose for the story that you're telling. And always be thinking about what carries the reader and what will move the story along. And then you want to weed out the rest. I talked about writing tight back in episode 16, and I also gave you several examples of that. And if you go to that blog post as well, I have a chart right there that gives some examples. I'll link to that in the show notes too. But make sure that whatever you are weaving into this story, it needs to be there, and it's going to help the story. Everything needs to be pulling it along and not distracting for the reader. Number 2, figure out what data do you need to be collecting in the first place. If you don't know, then how is the funder going to know, and how is it going to make sense? Some of this may vary from grant to grant depending on the question they're asking and depending on your proposal, but you have a good idea of what programs you're running already. You have an idea of your goals for the nonprofit and what you're wanting to be accomplishing in the community. So you should already have certain metrics set up for that. You should be measuring some of those different aspects of that program. And then when the grant comes along, you can use those internal program measurements, and then you can also look at the community data and the research and different pieces that support what you're trying to do. I work with clients on this with their grant applications to help them figure out what's going to be the most impactful data. There's so much research out there. So much of it is very credible and a lot of it is not. So you really have to be careful to pull out good data and good research. If you need help with that, send me a message and let's talk about how I can support you with that aspect of your program. Number 3, start collecting the data way before you need it. Don't wait till the grant is due in 2 days and, oh no, I've got to show how this food pantry is serving at-risk families and why these students need these services. I've got to figure out where to find the data, and no offices are open, so I can't get the information I need. I can't gather what I need. Start way ahead. Start looking again at your programs, the types of services, and what data is going to be related to that. Number 4, make sure you're keeping all this data in a central place. That might be a Google Doc or a spreadsheet, or if you have an internal system that you use with your grant writing business or in your nonprofit, like Asana or Trello or something like that, keep it all in one central place so that you're not trying to hunt down the research you've already done. Keep it organized, keep it streamlined so that you can easily and quickly go back and pull it when you need it. Number 5, check for updates regularly. Data changes, new research comes out, statistics can go up and down all the time, so it's important that you have up-to-date data, and also consider the time frame of the data that you're using and providing. Make sure everything is accurate and as up-to-date as possible. And that brings me to number 6. Always, always be accurate and truthful. I mean, to me, that goes without saying, but I feel like it just needs to be said across the board. Don't twist the data. Don't skew it. You can choose how you want to present it so that it's the most impactful, but don't ever try to manipulate or hide things or cover up facts that you don't want them to see. Always be accurate. Always be truthful. And even if there's not a place to cite your data sources directly in the grant application, make sure you still keep track of those sources in your own files so that you can document those and then refer back to it later if needed. A question might come up, a grant funder might say, hey, can you tell us where you found this research? A board member might want to know more about it, or you may need to use it on a future grant application that does want to know the source. So make sure you're keeping track of that to where you can back up the statements that you're making. I was working with a client who is based in the US, but they support nonprofit work that happens overseas. And they were concerned because they don't have access to some of the data. They're not the ones on the front lines running the organizations firsthand. And partly they are also restricted just by some different government regulations and things to not be able to gather some of the data the way they thought they needed to. So we talked about what data they did have, and we really started digging into that to what they could report on and what stories they could tell. And they realized that they already do have quite a bit of data that they can use and weave that into the stories. Maybe they don't have quite as much as they would like if the nonprofit were located right here next door to where they could be designing and collecting the information the way they want. But they did have quite a bit. They just needed to start naming and recognizing those pieces and maybe build on those from what they did have and then see what else they could add to supplement that data collection as well to be able to collect a little more robust and thorough data. That was helpful for them just to talk it through and to brainstorm some different ideas for data collection. And then also, even more importantly, how they could effectively use the data they did have. In episode 60, we talked about some nonprofit storytelling tips, and I recommended that you build a bank of stories to draw from. And it's the same with data. data, whatever. But I recommend that you have that available because different types of grants might need different types of data depending on the program that you're supporting and the information that you're trying to convey. This is exactly how I help nonprofits. We work on helping you build a solid, adaptable framework for your grant applications. You've got to have a good foundation if you want to build long-term sustainable funding. And that's what we work on together so that you have that foundation to pull from. We also go through very specific examples of this in the Fast Track to Grant Writer program. I show you different ways to use the data to make the most impact, and then we even have homework exercises to practice doing that with different types of data. So if you are in either of these places, I would love to support you so you can scale your nonprofit or your grant writing career much faster. Go to teresahuff.com and send me a message. Let's create a ripple effect together. Don't forget to sign up for the webinar this week, and remember to check out today's sponsor, Instrumental, to take a load off your grant writing work. All right, friends, we talked about 6 tips today for data-driven stories. Number 1, remember the elements of a good story. Number 2, figure out what data you need to be collecting in the first place. Number 3, start collecting the data way before you need it. Number 4, keep it in a central place. Number 5, check for updates regularly. And number 6, always be accurate and truthful. If you need help collecting your data, shoot me a message and let's talk about how you can do it. Which one of these data tips will you implement today? I'd love to hear about it. Join me in the free LinkedIn community or send me a message and let's chat about how you are using this data to make a bigger impact. All right, my friends, have a great week and go change your world.